Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. This is Rihan Ahmed, lecturer in English, University of Education, Lahore. The topic of today's lecture is modernism and its characteristics. As we all know very well about the history of English literature, that there are many periods and ages in English literature, and each age talks about differently about the culture, about the historical archives of that age, about the tradition, about the language, about the style, about the poets and their genres as well. So, as all the ages are important in English literature, because every age represents its own academia, every age represents its poets, and it reflects the lives of the people. So that is why one of the most important age is also the modernism in history of English literature. And today's lecture is all about the characteristics of the modern poetry and the characteristics of the age as well. And as we know that the poets are representatives, they are basically the representatives of the age, they are the representatives of the lives of the people. So that is why we can say that this age will also be representing or reflecting the lives of people in a poetic manner. Starting from the definition, you can say, or the introduction of the age, as we know that modernism, as this term is originated from the word modernus. This word is not, you can say, the new one, rather its origination is an old one, because the Greeks, they have also used this word modern, like modernus, that means current, that means present. It means modernism is the current time or the present time. When we talk about modernism, modernism is a philosophical and an artistic movement, along with cultural trends and changes aroused from wide scale of transformation in Western society during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. We can see that the modernism is a philosophical and artistic movement with its cultural trends and language, with its cultural trends and changes that are arisen from the lives of the people. And this particular moment is most of the time attached with the English people or the lives of the English people. And similarly, another concept, that is basically the concept of literature with this age, it is the poetry, it is the modern poetry, or it is the literature. As we can also see that the modern poetry started with the appearance of Imaginists in the early years of 20th century. Imaginists were a group of poets who wrote in reaction to perceived excess of Victorian poetry, with its emphasis on traditional formalism and ornate diction. And we will also see that the conceptions that have already been utilized, that have already been used by the Victorian poetry, so those conceptions have been, you can say, denied. Those conceptions have been abrogated by the modern poets, by the modern writers as well. So that is why this poetry, this modern poetry, is a reaction against the Victorian poetry. And then some of the major characteristics of this age is that the modern poetry does not often, rather it most of the time disrupted syntax, which refers to irregular sentence structure. And you can also see that the modern poetry include that they are not concerned with the sentence structure, rather whatever they want to write about a particular situation, a particular reflection of life, they start writing about them. instead of thinking about the sentence, about the sentence structure, and about the other regularities. And moreover, you will also see that the many stylistics experimentation and disrupted syntax as well. So you will also see there are many stylistic experimentations or experiments that have also done in this age. Then there is another term, stream of consciousness, that is, you can say, coined by William James to describe the natural flow of a person's thought. So stream of consciousness is also one of the most influential and one of the most effective terms in the modern poetry and in the modern novel as well, because this modern concept of stream of consciousness does not include, as we've already talked about, that the regular sentence structure and the regular or the syntax as well. So that stream of consciousness, whatever comes in your mind through the intuition, the process of intuition, or whatever comes in your mind, you have to write that down. Instead of you will be taking that material in your mind, and you will be synchronizing each and everything. So instead of doing that in stream of consciousness, there is a natural flow of a person's thought, that he or she will write everything down, whatever comes in their mind. Then there is another concept, you can say another most important concept of the modern poetry or of the modern novel is the alienation. Alienation, as we can also see that the alienation is it is also a self-alienation, it is also a societal alienation, it is also a religious alienation. So you can use this term alienation with so many other concepts. As we can say, the alienation is when the characters or speakers feel disconnected from people, society, or the world. Because in modern age, you will also see the people of this age, they felt detached from the previous world. They felt detached and disconnected from the religion. They felt detached and disconnected by the world. Why it was that? Because there are many causes that has turned the people of this age into a self-alienation. Like one of that is basically the religion, because the World War I, it has also affected the lives of the people. The lives of the people, like when the people were actually praying from the gods, they were praying to cease this war, and there was a massacre. There were the people who were being slaughtered, being killed in this war, and there was no god. There was no god to help the people of this modern world. So that is why people felt disconnected and detached from the religion, because whenever they wanted God to help them, God was not there. So that is why alienation does include a lot of concepts. It includes the self-alienation, when the people felt detached or disconnected from themselves, and the people felt detached and disconnected from the outer world. So then we can say that all these conceptions are basically included in the modern poetry, and that is the second type. And then you will also see that in this poetry, the focus is on the images. As we know that image or the imagism, it is also a concept of the mind, a concept of the mind in which there is a mental picture, and you are imagining something, and you are drawing something in your mind, and you are talking about that. So it means that is your world, and that your world is drawing the things, drawing the outer world in whatever means. So it is basically the concern of the modern poets as well, that they are focusing on the images, they are focusing on the mental pictures, whatever they can perceive or whatever they think about the other world or whatever that is. And another concept that has you can say been that has been a concept of all the ages of the literature, and particularly this concept has already been described and talked of in the Victorian era also, and in the previous ages we have also seen some of the chunks of this concept, as it is also talked about in this age about the concept of realism. And realism, we can also see, it is also one of the most influential concepts in the modern poetry and in the modern literature, as it also focuses on the things, that how to present something or someone in a realistic manner, instead of giving that particular thing or person or place, whatever that is, an imaginative touch or a utopian conception. So that is why focus was on realism, that how realistically you have to define something so that it can be understandable for the readers, for the world, or for the people. And whenever there is a concept of religious detachment, cultural detachment, or societal disconnectivity, you will also find that is a pessimism, because in your isolation, what we people really feel, it is basically the pessimism, it is the hopelessness, because we cannot, or we can no more rely on the people, we can no more rely on the religion, on the society. So that is why we are turning ourselves into a pessimistic beings. So that is why there is another theme of pessimism that is all the time associated with this modern poetry and literature. Then the love, because these are basically the themes like realism, pessimism, and love, or the alienation. Those are basically the characteristics of every age throughout the history of English literature, because love is found in Shakespearean plays also, love is found in the old ancient plays and dramas also, love is found in classical poetry also, love is found in romantic poetry also. So love is found in every age that you have studied or that you will be studying. You will find that the concept of love is basically the concept of universal or the universe. So that is why we can say that love is found everywhere, in every aspect of life. And then nature and humanitarian and democratic note. You will also see that the nature is also associated in every age or with the lives of the people. And on the other hand, humanitarian and democratic note, like humanitarian and democratic note is basically thinking about the people on the humanistic grounds, that how the people must be facilitated, how the people must be given the high esteem, the high authority in the society instead of the other things. So individual is focused, and humanistic ways, humanistic point of views are basically ensured in this age to know about the lives of the people in an exact form. And then you will also see that the syntax is how we structure sentences and languages. As we've already discussed this concept in the previous slides, that the syntax is that how we are structuring the language, how we are structuring the sentences. And this is another phenomena that most of the poets and most of the writers of the early ancients or the ancient ages, they have already talked about, and they have talked about their lives, or the lives of the people and the other things, with their own languages, with their own structures, and with their own genres. As Shakespearean writings are totally different from the writings of Sophocles, and John Donne's writings are different from that of Shakespeare. So, like, you will see that in every age, the sentence structure, the languages, the style, the diction, it is all changed. And in this age, poetry and other sentence and languages are also basically changed. Here's an example that you can see on this slide, that Cummings experimented heavily with syntax. One example of this is in his poem, anyone lived in a pretty how town, anyone lived in a pretty how town with up so floating many bells down, spring, summer, autumn, winter. He sang his did, not he danced his did. So you can see here that the sentence structure is not grammatically correct, but it comes to know about the things, when it comes to know about the style of a writer, you will see that structures of the sentences are basically made with the proper or improper understanding of the writers. But what is important? Idea. To convey an idea, it is important basically. Rather, language is not important, or language is not found important in poetry, but the idea is most important in the modern era. So that is why they do not focus on the syntax, they do not focus on the sentence structure, rather they focused on the idea, that we just need to convey an idea to the people so they can easily, or in a simple language, understand what a writer has intended to talk about. Let's move and talk about the other concept that we have already discussed, but with this concept, the stream of consciousness. Stream of consciousness is a narrative mode that seeks to portray an individual's point of view by giving the writer equivalent of the character's thought processes, either in a loose interior monologue or in connection to his or her actions. And you will see this concept has been utilized, has been used by many modern poets. And this concept of stream of consciousness is also one of the most influential, and you can say the magnum opus of this age. As you can see the examples, like the writers who have used this technique. T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of Alferd Prufrock is an example of use of stream of consciousness. And then Eliot tends to impose specific meanings onto the images in his poem. So an example is also given, but we just need to understand the concept of stream of consciousness before moving further. That stream of consciousness basically is an uninterrupted flow of your thoughts. As when I was a supervisor at Government College University Faisalabad, so my supervisor used to tell me that whenever you need to write something in your thesis, you have to write it down without any disruption, without any obstacle. For example, if there's something in your mind about your friends, about the TV shows, you have to write them down without any interruption, because your your flow of thoughts is basically providing you an information or insight, a deep insight, what you know about the other things. So like, he also told me not to write them down permanently on that thesis. Rather, he said that you just need to remove the material when you are done with the things. So that is why we just need, in the stream of consciousness is basically the same concept in which we can say that the things are being basically done without interruption or without any obstacle. So here are some lines from the poem, that indeed there will be time to wander, and do I dare, time to turn back and descendant steer, with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. The poem narrates the self analysis of man, Prufrock, who exposes the void and soulless quality of the modern world through his experiences. And why this technique is so important, to talk about the lives of the people, to talk about the behaviors of the people, because the people of this age, they are perfectly the match of this concept of stream of consciousness, because they are the perfect match. They are the match of this age, because stream of consciousness talks about their flow of the thoughts. Instead of they must think about their thoughts, and they must think about their imagination in a realistic manner, or in a logical manner. So that is why this concept is important, because the people, they do not have enough time to synchronize the thing, or to organize the thing in a good way. Rather, they are just giving the cathartic feelings to their poetry, and to the novels, and to the literature. So that is why this concept is also important, just to talk about the things, no matter what is the language. Rather, you must focus on the idea that you are conveying to the people. And then imagism, as we've already discussed this concept, because in the previous slides we have talked about and we've defined these imagism in one sentence, in one example, but now we'll be explaining them, that how these concepts are basically holding the age of the modern poetry, holding the age of the modern era. That imagism, a subset of modern poetry. And in traditional poetry, poets describes, there is a mistake, poets describes, and it is poet describes, or if we just need to make it is poets, then describe, not describe. Sorry, this is a typing mistake. So poets describe images in great detail, and then link the images to a philosophical idea or theme. As we can see that the images or the imagism, or the concept of the imagism, is that a writer is making an images, or describing the images in great details, and he is also linking the philosophical idea, whatever he or she is having in their mind. So they are linking that philosophical idea with that image. So it means the imagism is when a philosophical idea is linked or connected with an image. That image can be an imitation of anybody's life. It can be an imitation of a culture, of a history, of a language, of a family life, of a domestic life, or it can be an image of anything. So, but What is the philosophical idea? The philosophical idea is basically the product. It is the production of the writer. It is the production of the poet, that he or she is basically connecting that philosophical idea with the image. And what is image? Image is the reflection, it is the depiction, it is, you can say, the representation of any man, of any woman, of any culture, of any history, of anything. It can be a representation of anything. So that is why we can say the imagism is our connection between the philosophical ideas of the writer and the representation through the images of an age or of the people. So that is why this is the concept of imagism. I hope so you have understood. And then imagist poetry. The writer does not talk about the themes behind the images. They let the images itself to be the focus of the poems. And you can also see that there is no theme behind the images. Rather, images are basically the focus of the poems. And what are specifically the images that a writer is using in the poetry? Because we cannot say that a writer is a painter too. A writer is basically making a picture and adding those pictures in the poems or in the poetry. No, rather it means that the poet is basically making images or describing images as symbols. As we know that the black color is also a symbol, and that symbol is basically giving a lot of connotations. That symbol is basically means that dark color is the symbol of hopelessness. Dark color is basically the symbol of fear. Dark color is basically the symbol of inferiority. It means that the images are that we are not adding the exact or the real images into the poetry. Rather, we are using the images as symbols to represent the lives of the people, to talk about the lives of the people in the form of images instead of the real images. And then you can also see that different poets of this age and writers of this age, they have used the same conception that we've already studied and already talked about, in which they've talked about the self-alienation, they've talked about the concept of imagism, the concept of pessimism, the concept of love, and many others. And how these writers and poets have managed to talk about under the you can say the dogma of this age, as many other precedent writers and poets have talked about. We will also say this. And now let's talk about Ezra Pound, one of the most influential poets of this age. And you can say that what Ezra Pound has to say about the concept of imagism, because Ezra Pound is also one of the founders of the modern school of imagism. So set out three guidelines that direct treatment of the subject is necessary. So what is basically the direct treatment of the subject? When you have to deal with a subject, you have to be very straightforward. Instead of you will be talking about the devices, you will be talking about the other things that are basically deviating the readers from the main focus. So that is why our direct treatment of the subject is basically necessary. Yet you must focus on the central things instead of the other ideas, instead of the other themes. And the second point is basically use no word that does not contribute to the presentation. And whenever you have to use a term, you have to use a word, that word particularly or specifically mentioning mentioning the style, mentioning the life, or you can say something related to the life of the people. Instead of, it must not or it may not talk about anything. So any used word must be representing something that is related and connected with the lives of the people. So it must be contributing in this sense, it must be contributing with the presentations of the things, with the presentations of the people. Compose in the rhythm of the musical phrase, not in the rhythm. So rhythm is not focused as it was in the Romantic era, that rhythm was focused. Instead of composition in the rhythm of the musical phrase, it is basically the you can say the focus of the modern poets, and specifically of the imagists. Then there is another writer and poet, Wallace Stevens, a philosopher aesthetics, vigorously exploring the notion of poetry as a supreme fusion of the creative imagination and objective reality. So his view is also about the objective reality of the life and the creative imagination. So what is creative imagination? Creativity is when a writer is creating something of his own or of her own, and the objective reality is basically when you have to talk about the objectives, sorry, you have to talk about the other people, you have to talk about the lives of the other people. So that is objective reality. And when you have to talk about yourself, when you have to talk about your imagination, you have to talk about your subjectivity, your experiences, your emotions and feelings. So that is a subjective reality. And we can also say that the whole literature, whole English literature can be comprised with these two terminologies, subjective literature and objective literature. Because many of the writers and poets and the novelists and the dramatists, they've talked about they have talked about in their conceptions in subjective reality, and many of them they've talked about in objective reality. And objective reality and subjective reality, you can also consult internet if you didn't understand what this objective and subjective reality mean. He exalted the imagination for its ability to press back against the pressure of reality, and Ezra Pound vowed to make it new and break the pentameter. And Ezra Pound is he has also made this concept very easy to make it new. And in modern age, this term, this you can say phrase, make it new, is basically enough to understand the whole age of the modern time. Because in the modern era, they are not rejecting each and everything, they are not rejecting each and every concept of the precedent ages, rather they are actually making the things new. So it will not be this will not be saying this will not be saying bad to say this modern age as the fourth hand renaissance, because they are also making the things new. And Ezra Pound's this phrase, make it new, is basically the perfect example of the modern age, that there are many other things, there are many other conceptions, and there are many other philosophies and theories. They all are associated with this age, and the people and the poets of this age, they are making the things new, they are making the old concepts of the writers in a They're showing their old concepts, called concepts of the people, in a new shape. So that is why this is also important to talk about this phrase, to make it new, because make it means it indicates words of past. Make it new, it means we have something already, and new means that we are creating something new. So make it new, that we have already something and we have to make that new, we have to create something out of that. And then moving further, we are, because we are taking much time on these slides, so the images. So what images most of the time uh, talk about the concept of the poetry, as we can see here that the imagists reject discursiveness of romantic and Victorian poetry, because the images, they, even though have many things to talk about, many new concepts that they have taken from the old poetry, but they are also making something new out of the old things, and by rejecting them, or by showing them, showing their versatility, that they have produced something new, that have already been, that have not already been discussed or written. And then we can also see that the old literature, including the romantic, including the classical, including the Shakespearean or Elizabethan, they have used, except a few ages, except Shakespeare, they've used the language, the language, free verse especially. And that free verse is basically the genre related to the Shakespearean age, and iambic pentameter related to the Shakespearean age. But in this age, we can say they reject that the language should not be ordinary. The language should not be that we must be talking about the free verse style. It can be any language. The poetry can be written in any language, or it can be ordinary language, and it can be the high language, the language of the great people, the language of the educated people. So it can be the language of any people. And then exact word instead of decorative. So the exact, using the exact words, using the exact vocabulary instead of using the decorative language. That sometimes the poets are making the things beautiful by adding different literary devices into them. So that concept is also good, but the modern poets, they have to make something new out of the ordinary. So that is why they use that the focus must be on the theme, instead of you will be making it deviated by using different literary devices, sometimes metaphors, sometimes similes, sometimes personification. So like you are using these devices in poetry, and you are making your audience and readers deviated. So that is why exact word must be used instead of the decorative one. And then complete freedom in choice of subject. So a writer and poet, they are totally free, they are totally independent to choose any subject to talk about, or to write about. Because if the writer or the poets will be will if they will be bound to not to talk about this and to talk about this specific thing, then they will not be displaying their talent in literature. As we can also see that this type of bondage, this type of limitation was put on the writers and the poets of the Puritan age, in which they have to talk about, particularly they have to talk about the biblical writing. They have to talk about the writings of the Bible, related to the Bibles. So that is why this bound has been placed, has been put on the Puritan writers. So that is why in the modern era we can say that the complete freedom was given to the poets and the writers to choose a subject of their own choice. So that is why a complete freedom is focused in this age, and it is also included in the characteristics of the modern poetry. And then created new rhythms that express new moods. And we can also see that the new rhythms and new templates were made by the modern poets and the writers, because they have created something new out of the ordinary, and they have made and they have constructed new sentence structures, they have constructed new rhythms and new compositions in the poetry or in the novels too, so that they can be doing something good, something extraordinary in the ordinary things. So that is why we can say that the new compositions were also made in this modern poetry. And a depiction of reality through images. It is also important that the depiction of reality through image, as we've talked about earlier, it is also necessary, because the depiction of reality is basically the concept in which we are explaining the images, we are explaining the themes of that particular subject, so that the reality can be presented, the reality can be displayed in front of the people. And then wrote short poems to create exact and concentrated pictures. As we already know about, in the old times, there were many poets who have written the poems who were actually about 200 lines, about 100 lines, and more than that. And in the modern era, many of the poets, except T.S. Eliot, as he has written The Wasteland, more than 200 lines or 300 lines. So it is 300 lines, more than 300 lines. So then they have produced, they have written short poems to develop a concentration of the readers on the themes of the subject, or they must be it must be related with the interest of the audience, so that they can focus on that particular subject or the particular theme that the writer is intended to convey. So that is why the short poems are basically written instead of the long poems that would be deviating the attentions of the readers. Okay, now the concept of realism, as we have already discussed this concept of realism in the early slides, and now we'll be talking about realism, in which we'll see that how this concept is basically a focus of the poets of the modern era, and how they have utilized this concept into their poetry. And as modern poetry is marked with realism, and realism in its the product of a reaction against the pseudo romanticism of the last century over and above the influence of the science. And we'll be talking about different modern poets and poets and writers in detail in the second part of the lecture. But now my purpose is basically in this lecture to talk about the characteristics of the modern poetry, so you can easily contextualize and develop a background to understand the poets and the writers in a good sense. And then the last but not the least concept of this age is realism. As we've talked about, the realism is basically the reflection or the depiction of the things, of the culture, of anything as it is. And this concept is also used by many poets and writers like Robert Frost and Edmund Blunden and Gibson and many other writers. And this concept is different from the concept of the romantics, as they tear the veil which the romanticists had placed between life and art. But we can see here that the poets and the writers of this modern age, they have removed the veil between from the life and the art of this age, and they have openly talked about the concepts of concepts of the common life, and they have talked about the lifestyles of the people in a realistic manner rather in a utopian or rather in an imaginative manner. And we will see that that this concept of realism is utilized by many writers, but that is basically as we can see in Robert Frost's poetry. And Robert Frost, as a modern poet, he also put some of the main conceptions of related to the people's life, related to the people's objectives and purposes in his poetry. As we can take one example from Robert Frost stopping by woods on a snowy evening, in which he has mentioned that there are many promises to make, many promises to fill, and how the people must be going for that, going for them, so that they can be, or their life can be accomplished with. And today's lecture is ended now, and I hope so you must be understanding some of the conceptions of the modern poetry, and the second part will be uploaded soon. And thank you very much.